Imagine life in Southeast Alaska a millennium or longer ago. A land sparsely populated. A land stewarded by the Tlingit, Haida, and Tsimshian peoples who still exist here today. In this beautiful region, salmon has always returned to the creeks in which they were born each summer to spawn. These very fishing runs were passed down from generation to generation to harvest from. Not only were salmon a highly nutritious source of food, but a sacred, respected resource that nourished generations of people since the Great Migration over the land bridge called Beringia, from modern-day Russia to Alaska tens of thousands of years ago. There's a long and rich history that predates American and Alaska fishing culture. But today, what I do know is that it is a resource that is greatly harnessed by today's Alaskan population. So you might be asking, where does a person like me sit within this deeply rich culture and history of fishing here in Southeast Alaska? Well, fishing is a way of life here in Alaska, and specifically in this video I will be focusing on Southeast Alaska because, believe it or not, Alaska is a very big place. Fishing, to put it lightly, is a livelihood for many people in this region. In this video I will be sharing my experience gill netting for dog salmon and longlining for halibut. I initially took this job in order to help build out my beautiful rainforest property next spring and save up a little bit of money. I very quickly realized that there's more to the story of fishing here in Southeast Alaska, and I really wanted to share this kind of neat and cool but challenging experience so that you can kind of get the inside scoop of where your seafood comes from, at least from the perspective of a wild harvester. And I wanted to give a little context and some history to the fishing industry here in Southeast Alaska, as well as help you understand why you should buy wild harvest seafood as opposed to farmed. Very quickly, I'd like to thank the sponsor of this video, Aura. This past week I was really grateful to have Aura working in the background while I was out of cell service. I know that when I'm away, my digital privacy is taken care of so I don't arrive home to any surprises. How many people have you shared your Netflix password with, or any online service you may use? The average consumer has 90 accounts. Do you have 90 different passwords? You probably don't, which means if someone has one of your passwords, they probably have access to a couple other accounts of yours. This leaves you extremely vulnerable to unwanted account access, and where there's unwanted account access, identity theft and fraud is never too far behind. If you think it can happen to you, know that American consumers lost $56 billion due to identity theft scams in 2020. That's why I'm excited to partner with Aura, who is sponsoring this video. Aura is identity theft protection, fraud monitoring, a VPN, password management, and antivirus software all combined into one easy-to-use app. Aura monitors the dark web for your emails, passwords, and social security numbers and sends alerts fast, right to your phone and email. When it comes to fraud, every second matters. Connect your credit card bank accounts and get notified of any changes up to 4 times faster than Aura's competitors. Their VPN allows you to stay anonymous online by keeping your browsing history and personal information safe and encrypted. And their antivirus software will block your malware and viruses before they infect your devices. So far, Aura has detected my information on the dark web twice. That's pretty creepy. Don't put your family at risk. Try Aura free for 2 weeks and see if your personal identifiable information has been leaked to the dark web. Start your free trial with the link aura.com/Loui. Link is in the description below. Thanks, Aura. Before I get to explaining what longlining and gill netting is like, the 2 types of fishing that I did this past couple of weeks, I want to explain a few other ways that people fish, and one of those is called seining. So basically what my skipper explained to me and what my understanding of what seining is, so there's a nice big boat that is your main boat. You have a crew of about 4 people. You put out a net. There's a person who runs another skiff that comes off of the big boat, and basically you close a net around fish, and then purse seining is when you close the bottom of it. So basically what this skiff is doing is they close the net, close the bottom so it becomes like a purse, and then you pull the net up and out comes your beautiful salmon. So that is one way that I have not tried yet, but I think is very cool. Then there's also a thing called trolling, and that's where you put out poles and your boat moves along and it catches them on hooks. That's my understanding of what it is. And then there's another way to get seafood, which is putting pots into the water at different depths to collect shrimp, different various species of crab, which I did earlier on in the summer, which personally isn't really my thing, I think. And then there's the 2 other types of techniques that I learned this summer which I'm really grateful to have learned because it was so just interesting and cool to see. So basically the adventure started off with us doing gill netting at a hatchery, which I will explain more about when I give you all some more history about salmon and stuff here in this area. But gill netting is basically where you put out a really long net that can be up to, I think, a 1/4 mile long. I believe so. And you put out a net, it has buoys on it, and then there's like a side of the line that is floats and a side of the line that is called a lead line, and it goes down in the water, and there's these little squares in the net, it's called mesh, that the salmon get tangled up in. So we're seeing lots of salmon jumping, dog salmon, from the hatchery, which is a good sign. We might be catching a lot of chum salmon. I'm gonna see if I can catch one on camera. Yeah, I saw some over there. You're not gonna be able to see it on the, oh yeah, jumpers right over there. That's a sign that there's a lot of fish out here. Come on fish, jump for me. Oh, there's one. They're everywhere. I've never seen fish do that before. And they're not little fish. I hope this is catching it on camera because that's pretty funny. This is a good sign. You put out this really long line using a reel and you wait a little bit. What my skipper did is she kept making sure that the net was in a good spot, nothing wasn't getting caught on anything. We were kind of fishing in more of a complicated area than normal, between two islands, so it made it kind of, you had to pay more attention to the net. This is our line, and whoa, something took it under. Yeah, I was like, oh my god. That was a whole bunch! Oh, that was cool. So there's a little wheel thing that it pulls up on, and it goes on the reel like that. On the net. And then we put the fish in there. And then we store them in these holes here in a thing called a grailer bag. Yeah. We got 53 dog salmon, and I'm wearing a camouflage sweater that my skipper let me borrow. I don't normally wear camouflage. And yeah, basically once you do that, you wait a little bit until the net looks like it's not catching anymore, and you can tell the net is catching because the little buoys will bob up and down, and that's how you know stuff is running into your net. And then afterwards, together you pull in the net on a reel, and slowly you get fish. And this was a really fun experience this time at the hatchery, because catching dogfish, because there were times when we would pull in like 7 or 8 big dog salmon just overboard at one time, and then you have to untangle it. And there are methods for how you untangle it from the gill net, and eventually you get kind of used to like, okay, I see that I need to turn this one, or like I can pull it out via its tail or its head, and you just learn ways of pulling them out. I know this is a part that people don't like to listen to or don't want to hear, but you do have to kill the fish. I really liked my skipper, because every time we would catch a fish, we would thank the fish. Every time that I would have to, you know, bleed the fish out, I'd be like, thank you fish for your life and the potential places you're gonna go and the people you're gonna feed. So that's that's what you do. It's definitely not glamorous. I very much do not like having to do that. It's the part that I hate the most. But that being said, I think that I eat fish anyways. I think there's something in experiencing such a visceral and very like human thing, like the act of like harvesting life from the water and thanking it and seeing where it comes from, I think is really important, and in doing the very human thing of consuming food. Though I didn't like it, it felt like it was something that is also very innate within our human instinct. if that makes sense. I really like gill netting because it can be very relaxed, or it can also be very rough. Like, you can experience pretty rough waters and things like that, so you never know what you're gonna get. You guys, we barely made the cutoff for our opening, and this is how much fish we were rushing so fast to get done before it was illegal. Look at this. Kenya, that was crazy. Oh, it's done. Now it's time to halibut fish. And the last type of technique for fishing that I know a good amount about, enough to share, is long lining. I learned how to do that in this past week. Long lining, let me tell you, is intense. Long lining is just that. You put line in, long line out, and in very, very deep waters. There's a unit called the fathom, and a fathom is equivalent to 6 feet, and we were fishing in like anywhere from 40 to 80 fathoms of water. So 80 times 6, what is that? 480 feet. You can get fish like black cod, gray cod. You have to have a permit for these things and like stuff, rockfish, different various types of rockfish. And what we were going for was halibut. Look at the mountains. Sometimes you forget to look up. You've been working so hard. But there are mountains in the background. I felt like a sea cowgirl because these halibut were huge. I mean, the footage I did get, you can see that, you know, they're pretty big whompers. At one point, the biggest halibut we got was at least 130 pounds. That's like the size of me practically. Like, that was amazing, and having to pull that in is intense. So yeah, basically the practice of long lining is taking really long line that you put these hooks on, and we were using a kind of an unconventional version of hooks in like long lining gear. I don't know personally what the conventional long line gear looks like. Some of you might know. And basically, yeah, you put hooks on. My skipper and you bait them, and then you put hooks on this really, really long line that is like, feels like it's probably a mile long. I don't know exactly how long it is, but there, you put them on this long line that is called a skate. And yeah, so you do that, you put all of the hooks on, you lay it out, there's a buoy on one end and an anchor that holds the line down, and then you put all your hooks on it, and then you put another anchor as well as weights along the way to keep the line on the bottom, and you put an anchor and then another buoy. So that's how you know the ends of your line. That was confusing to me at first. I was like, how do you know where you put your line? Like, it just didn't make any sense to me. But once you see the process, it makes sense. So then you wait, you let it soak. Every fisher person has different methods and different areas that they like to fish in, and different ways of doing it, but you wait a certain amount of time, and then you come back to the beginning of the buoy and you pull it in, and you really never know what you're gonna get. I do kind of like, though this one feels like a very intense type of fishing to me, it's also kind of cool because you never know what you're gonna get. And of course you release everything that isn't the fish that you can legally keep on board. So any halibut that are too small, you throw out, you let loose off of the hook, you throw back, and ones that you're unsure of like its length for sure, you measure it, and even if it's just like over by half an inch, you just put it back just to make sure that you're getting the right size. And anyways, you want them to grow bigger anyways. And yeah, we caught things like starfish, then you take the starfish off, and all sorts of rockfish that you're able to keep and stuff. And yeah, it's kind of fun. At one point we also caught a little tiny baby shark. I don't know what kind of shark it was, but then we let it off the hook. You also catch these things called skates, which like look like alien versions of stingrays, but they don't. They have scales on the back, but they're not stingrays. And yeah, they're kind of funny. They have these like weird legs on them. They look like aliens to me. So that was cool too. Those are the 5-ish of ways that people mainly make a livelihood in this region in terms of fishing. There's also sea cucumber diving, which is a thing but that I personally probably will never try, but it is a thing that people do. Okay, hold up. If you've gotten this far in the video, keep watching because I'm going to talk about my experience more and some insight for if you want to become a deckhand yourself later in the video. But I'd like to back up a sec and have a little mini history lesson here. Call me Professor Loui. I want to talk about the progression of the fishing industry from the decimation of salmon run populations and the stealing of fishing grounds that were once stewarded by the native peoples of this region to today, and the management practices that were created to help keep each fishery sustainable and the advent of farm fish. I do want to preface this with the fact that I do not know everything about this topic, but I want to at least highlight some key points in history to give some context and maybe even throw you down a rabbit hole of research to learn more about this topic on your own. Sources, as always, are linked below. The area that I'm in is the land specifically stewarded by the Tlingit. They have been fishing here for millennium and have subsisted off the delicious seafood that can be found in this region longer than most of us can even fathom. One source I read states that the most valuable property of the Tlingit was a fishing ground or salmon stream, which was a family lineage possession handed down through generations. During the Russian occupation of Alaska from 1741 to 1867, Russia did not partake in any fisheries and was mostly in the game of sea otter fur trade. They did in fact trade with the native people for salmon, halibut, and other game. They did also build dams called zappers, which sometimes would block entire salmon runs for their benefit and would block salmon from native fishing streams. In the late 1800s, commercial fishing became a driving force in the southeastern region of Alaska after the sale of Alaska to the US for $7.6 million in 1867. A handful of canneries popped up in the region. From purse seining to hand trolling, the canneries were the middlemen that connected the product to the cash easily. This created a fishing boom that was unfortunately not well managed at first. The use of traps, which had much opposition from the native peoples and many fisher people as well, due to their use causing exploitation of workers and depletion of the salmon populations. The outlawing of fish traps eventually allowed populations to rebound. However, by the 1970s, the number of fisher people increased by 55%, causing the populations to plummet again. Every commercial fisher person has to purchase permits now that give you the ability to fish for different species, and there are limited amounts that you can harvest each year and very specific rules about sizes and the sex of fish you can keep, as well as seasonal openings and closings that are variable based on the current fish stock numbers. From my understanding, Fish and Game takes this very seriously, and if you don't have proper documentation, you can be fined very heavily. I've been stopped 3 times now in 1 year that I have lived here to check my documentation or to see what I was doing. The execution of these management practices helped the salmon populations to begin to return to sustainable levels. Today there is a fairly new practice that I get the sense that is somewhat hotly debated of producing millions of dog salmon, or also known as chum salmon, in hatcheries all over Southeast Alaska. On one hand, they do help to regulate fish stock numbers as well as provide another really viable resource for fisher people to make a living off of. But also, we seem to have very little data about how this might affect the ecosystem over time. But this I really don't have accurate or factual information about, so don't come at me. Overall, the salmon fishery here in Alaska has been officially classified as one of the most sustainable fisheries in the world. This is where the farm versus wild caught salmon question comes into play. In the 1990s, with the advent of aquaculture and other methods of farm fish, it caused the demand for wild-caught salmon products to decline, thus affecting the economic viability of the industry here in Alaska. Not only has it had a negative impact economically to small businesses, but to the environment. Often fish are raised in small, crowded bins and are starved and treated inhumanely. These crowded spaces also harbor disease and pests which must be treated with pesticides, which can sometimes seep into open waters. There are so many downsides to purchasing and consuming farm fish, another being the fact that these fish are fed corn and grains that aren't normally consumed in the wild. If you're just learning this, don't feel bad because I didn't know any of this until a year ago either. So that is a mini history lesson that hopefully can bring everyone up to date about this industry that I don't think many people know about, and I just find this really fascinating. If there's any information that I got wrong or anything you would like to add, definitely drop a line down below. I'm super interested and open to what you have to say. Something I noticed about being a deckhand is that there isn't a very apparent culture to being a deckhand here. Say you're someone who wants to go get a job as a deckhand here in Alaska. It's a very old school way of obtaining a job. Best ways to get a job as a deckhand here is to know people or to walk docks in different areas. So a lot of people will go up to places like Bristol Bay and walk docks there and try to get on a boat that way. There sort of is this culture of like being really open-minded with just whatever adventure you're gonna have, and I think that's pretty cool. Fisher people are some of the most adventurous people that I have ever met. So if it's your first year being a deckhand and you know absolutely nothing about boats, you are a greenhorn, and some people use that term, some people don't, but it's but it basically means that you don't know anything, you're hopping on a boat. In my experience, in my first year doing fishing, I do have friends and people who are experienced in the fishing industry, so I can ask them questions about what's like fair, etc. But for a lot of people, if you just come up here, you don't really know what's a fair pay, you don't know what conditions are the safest conditions to be working in, and like ones that you should accept, stuff like that, and that's like something to look out for. It really adds to that adventure factor, I think. Yeah, so then once you become hired as a deckhand and you and a skipper hit it off, and there's the crew and you, if there's more than one person on the boat, hit it off, then you will go out and fish with people. It's very, very spontaneous, I think, a lot of the time, because a lot of people, you know, deckhand, there's a revolving door of deckhands, and it's like the retention, like you just have to hope you get on a good boat. You're playing roulette, you're playing deckhand roulette basically, and once you get on the boat, a lot of the time you're living on the boat with your skipper and what other crew that you have for, you know, days at a time. This past trip that I went on was 6 days, and so you better hope that you get along with the people on the boat, because it could go bad, that's for sure. You're definitely taking a risk. But usually, like, when you have a conversation with a skipper, you can kind of tell like what kind of person they're going to be. But people also do change on the water. That is another thing. People really do change out on the water. You never know what you're going to get sometimes. And yeah, everybody takes turns cooking. I think there is on some boats a really good culture of like eating well. Like that's something that happens, is you have to eat a lot of food because you're doing a lot of physical labor and you're just hungry all the time. So eating well, if you can get on a boat where you're eating, where there's good food and you eat well, that's great. Yeah, and so basically you wake up every day, and the longer you can have your gear in the water do fishing for you is the better. So that's what everybody's working towards. And yeah, you'll do things like help drive the boat, be on boat watch. As a deckhand, you have to clean the deck a lot. At least on the boat I worked for, we were very good about keeping things clean as possible. I mean, when you're out in the water, it's hard to like get in all the crevices and stuff, but yeah, you make sure your deck is clean of seaweed and all the gross stuff as soon as you finish fishing. If you're not fishing, like, you want everything to be clean. And yeah, there's also a culture of having to have really good communication. At least on my boat, we were good at that, about saying where you are on the boat at all times. Like if you're going out to the stern to do something, you have to tell somebody. If you open any of the holds, any of that, you have to communicate that, because the more communication, I feel like, as a deckhand and as a crew, the better. Your safety levels go up by like tenfold if you have a crew and a skipper that's really good at communicating. This is our boat. Let's go. The propeller. There's a lot of it. This is like kind of scary. I'm gonna go around this way. Oh my god, there's kelp everywhere. That's setting our net. And there's like a dozen people out here too. Crazy. We thought we were gonna be the only people up here. Just hatchery. And there's also like etiquette, like I won't get into that, but there's etiquette about how you space between other boats if you're in an area with a lot of other boats fishing. There's a lot to it. I'm sure there's other videos and stuff about it, but that is just the culture of fishing and being a deckhand. The pay can be really, really good sometimes, or it can be really, really bad. I have experienced both sides of the spectrum. I think that if you're looking to be a deckhand up here or really anywhere, make sure that you understand what your payment rate is going to be. Like sometimes it's 15% plus a bonus if you do well, sometimes it's 20% off the top, sometimes it's 15 after expenses for your boat or 20 after the expenses for the boat and the food and the fuel and everything. So just make sure you communicate with the skipper that you're working for or the captain you're working for. Overall, I would rate my gill netting and long lining experience with this specific skipper a 10 out of 10. It was really such a good experience. I think that having a good skipper and like finding a type of fishing that you actually enjoy doing really makes or breaks it. I really think I like gill netting and long lining because you kind of have to have like your whole house with you. Like you basically are bringing a home with you and then you're fishing. So you got like the chaos of what fishing is and the stability of having a place to lay your head and a place to cook and stuff. And I think that really transfers over really well for being a vehicle dweller type person, road person, because it just feels like the same thing to me, except there's a mission and it's on the water. So overall, I think that I really like gill netting and long lining a lot. I think that I will probably do it again next summer at some point. I don't know if it's something that I technically would ever want to do, like own my own boat and do that. I mean, you really never know, but I really enjoyed the challenge of it and I learned a lot of skills in like a matter of 2 weeks. I really like with like fishing, you kind of have to, there's a lot that's involved cerebrally, like strategy for fishing and making sure you don't crash your boat, paying attention to weather. Like there's a lot to it that for some reason it gets into my blood and my soul and my bones and I'm like, this is freaking making me feel alive. I think that's what, maybe I'm just an adrenaline junkie. So yeah, I give the experience a 10 out of 10. I think it's really a very beautiful thing to see where your food comes from, whether that's, you know, if you're vegan or vegetarian or plant-based or whatever, seeing where your veggies grow. Or for me, I only really want to eat meats and seafood and things that I have hunted or foraged for or fished for myself is kind of what I'm more aiming towards. So learning how to fish in this way was really just a good experience that I will have forever, even if I don't ever gill net again in my life, which is not likely because living in Southeast Alaska and being a deckhand that is a good deckhand, I feel like you can't get away from it, but not to pat myself on the back. Yeah, I just think overall, main takeaway from this experience is, one, I freaking love Southeast Alaska. I freaking love boats. I love the boat life. And I really am just grateful to see where my food comes from. So there's one last thing that I need to cover, and that is, where does the fish go after you fish it? So after you fish it, there are a couple things you can do. The main thing that a lot of fisher people will do is you sell your fish to a boat called a tender. So that is also another avenue for living the boat life, for working in the fishing industry, are these really big boats that you go to and they tend things to you. So they usually are in partnership with a cannery. There's many canneries up and down Southeast Alaska. You hold all these fish in your holds and then you drive up or meet up with a tender, and then they take all of the fish out of your boat and they make sure all of it's good, they weigh it, and then you get a little tag that tells you how much you made from how many pounds you collected of the fish. And so that's a really good way to be able to stay out and keep fishing over a long period of time. And they store the fish, they'll tend you ice, I think some do fuel sometimes. I might be wrong about that. If you work on a tender, it's more of a stable income because you have a guaranteed rate every single day that you work, and sometimes the contracts are like 90 days, 60 days, so you're not taking the risk of, Mother Nature having a lot of fish in the water or a little bit of fish in the water. I don't know, I said that weird. So that's where the fish can go. You can also independently market the fish. I will leave a link in the description to the little small business, local business. I know these people who we sold our halibut and some sockeye fish to, so that you can pick some up if you want some, because support small businesses. And so you sell them to go to market, and a lot of the halibut and sockeye salmon that we got will be going to restaurants, straight to restaurants in the Pacific Northwest, as well as farmers markets, and I think sold independently as well. So I love it. Like, feels really good to have been fishing for like straight to the ocean to restaurant to table. That is also cool. I think that's also another thing you should look out for when you're looking for a fishing job, is who do you sell, who does the skipper you work for sell to? That's also a good thing to keep in mind. This is one of those adventures that I will remember for the rest of my life, one that I would not have had the privilege to experience if I had not held an open mind about something that I initially never thought I would ever want to participate in. So if you got anything from this video, it's when life presents you with something new to try, you gotta take life by the horns and jump right in sometimes, because to me, life is about adventures and the stories that you ultimately collect. And two, please, please, please don't buy farm fish. Promise me. Comment down below if you already knew all of this information and if I missed anything. I'm always open to information being verified and validified, as well as sharing some of your own experiences as a fisher person on the water or a deckhand, any of that. It's so interesting to me. This is a culture that it fascinates me. As well as comment down below any of the new information that you learned from this video that surprised you. I'm really curious to know if this video was impactful to you. Thanks for watching, everybody. Forehead kiss.